So we have 34 people live already.
Okay.
So we'll just wait for a minute and then we can start.
And initially instruct them and then I'll begin.
Yeah. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Vowel Knowledge series. Today we have James England and Shailesh Prabhune with us as guest speakers. We have 40 participants live so far. The number is still climbing. I would request everyone to please introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us where you're from. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A module or you can put them in the chat. We will try and get your questions answered from the speakers as and when we get some time in between. Ajay will be moderating the session and we'll start in just a minute from now. So Ajay, ready to go when you are? All set.
All set. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Like Parth said, this is a Vowel Knowledge Series webinars. This is the second of these sessions. And today we are focused on discussing the reskilling and upskilling during and post-COVID world. To give you a little background, Vowel has been focused on making learning happen. And we know that when we really want to make learning happen, it's not just what we build as a product or offer as a service, but unless and until we know from the industry experts and leaders as to what the real problems are that are faced by them, and unless and until we get their opinions and their thought process around how we could solve or address those challenges, there's no way we can build a better product or service. The other thing is we're all under stress right now with this COVID and Corona around us. And we don't know where this will lead us, where this will take us. But there's one thing for sure, that we need to really upskill ourselves and maybe even reskill ourselves. A lot of us, if not all of us. And that's why we have James and Shailesh, both coming in from different backgrounds. So while James is a director at Data Protection Education in UK, he's got a solid background in e-learning and education technologies. He's been working with some stalwart organizations like Cambridge Press for the digital projects. Shailesh is a president within Motherson Group. Shailesh has had a solid background in leadership positions in the manufacturing industries for Indian companies as well as European companies. And I thank you both, Shailesh and James, for joining us today. And
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Let's begin. So my first question is going to be for the both of you, and you can take turns to answer that. Are we really ready in terms of the skill sets that may be needed during this tough time and even after that? And those skill sets could be hard skill sets as well as soft skill sets. So to begin with, Shailesh, from India standpoint and the manufacturing industry standpoint, where do you see we are? And then I'll ask James to come with his thought process as well.
All right, Ajay, thanks for this question. This is quite an unprecedented situation. I think no one would have imagined just about 4 weeks back that we would be in such a situation. But now that we are faced with it, I think it's anyone's guess how much and how long would this impact last. But even without COVID, we were already living in, as they used to call, a VUCA world, which was full of uncertainties. Right. And the entire year, the Indian economy has been struggling a bit. The manufacturing segment is not where it should be. So many companies were already in some kind of cost saving mode all the time. And to answer your question on whether we have the right skill sets, there's a famous saying that we say in the manufacturing that there are the unemployment rate is very high, but there are less employable people. So, so that means there is definitely a deficit in the skill set, whether it is, actually working within the industry or also using of new techniques. For example, how do you train people from a distant? And those are all the challenges we are facing right now. But the challenges come with an opportunity. So if you replace the word challenges to opportunities, that's a different way of looking at things. So there is tremendous opportunity to upskill and reskill your entire team. And I have actually never in my career seen such an unprecedented need now from even from our customers of training them as well. So we have been every day we are having a lot of online training sessions and seminars, for our skilling of our own staff as well as for the customers. So that's, I would say that that's how you keep the team engaged as well. So from constantly talking about COVID, I mean, for example, I don't watch the news so often because it's all depressing. But how do you keep your energy levels high, by engaging with team and your customers? I think that is a great opportunity right now, as we say. So yeah, there is definitely a lot of scope to upgrade skills because we need the best people in front of customers, and for customers also, they need the best staff, trained by organizations like us as well. So I think it's an opportunity for everyone to learn new tricks.
So that's very positive and assuring as well. So James, what's your take on where we are today and where we could go, and what kind of competencies will be needed for us to be solid, strong, and to emerge as winners post-COVID world?
Well, where I'm seeing it, I mean, bear in mind the sector we work in is mostly public sector with schools. We do work in the commercial sector as well. What we've seen is certainly people doing the just in time of what they need immediately has been stuff for moving people to work at home. So if you take the UK school sector, schools are all shut down. So teachers and people working in schools have never, ever had this before, where all of a sudden they're expected to deliver learning and teaching to their students at home. So we're thinking about learning and teaching in that framework of what does that mean for employees and people and adults. There's a whole element of what is happening with learning and teaching right now with an entire year of students who may be ready to sit exams and go to university. University students who aren't able to finish university. How do we finish those to make sure our next generation is actually qualified and got the training and the learning that they need? And that's difficult at the moment, as not much of it is happening face-to-face in the classroom. And most educational systems around the world, apart from one or two virtual schools, really are based around teachers in the classroom and that one, that support of a teacher and teaching assistants. As far as staff are concerned, and we deal with staff training, we've seen an absolute massive increase in the people who are taking our the e-learning which is available to from us, which is basically around data protection, GDPR, and information security. So whereas we mandate as data protection officers, we are responsible for training around data protection in an organization. So we mandate that this takes place, and the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the regulator for data protection in the UK, says you should be trained every 2 years on data protection issues. And I think that's pretty standard where there is an equivalent law anywhere in Europe and around the world. We've seen difficulties in getting that done sometimes in schools because of a limited amount of time available. Now staff have a lot more time available and schools are catching up on a lot of training. So literally going from where we may have just the spike on our chart goes like this from about 2 weeks ago of people starting to take the e-learning. And they've been very glad that they had that e-learning available. Schools often like to do face-to-face training on their training days, and we've seen that massive increase of people wanting to do e-learning, which is very refreshing because I like e-learning for compliance issues. We all know compliance issues are very good for e-learning because you've got an actual record that somebody did it. Yeah. And whether they didn't do it, you can actually give them extra training to do. So it has been in some ways refreshing that people have found time to do this. At the same time, the concern is how do we maintain that when we go back? There's lots of other skills that we feel that people need, and it's my concern is when people go back into the classroom, it's all that refreshing of what we need to do when people go back into their other organizations. That change of getting everybody up to speed for work at home, and our work at home training looks at as well just not the best ways of working at home. There's all the technical issues of working at home. But one of the big issues, so the comment there, Shailesh, about sort of you're avoiding the news, I confess to being slightly a bit of a news junkie. And at the moment, it becomes a bit of a distraction to me about how do I make sure I'm doing work and not checking the news. And one of those things that we're concerned about, even though we're a data protection organization, we've always highlighted our work at home training and support is amongst our own team as a bunch of remote consultants, and we encourage everybody to do is make sure you're thinking about the mental health of people at home, because I think you're not going to be able to train people well, you're not going to get them being productive, and they're not going to be ready for coming back into work unless their mental health is good. And when people are working remotely, particularly if they are on their own, that's a massive issue. So we do training to actually make sure that there's really good regular communications, phone calls, contact people maybe living on their own, just to make sure that people feeling involved. Helps a lot with motivation, because productivity, I think, is probably going through the floor right now. People are enthusiastic to work at home for about a week, and then they start getting a little bit of cabin fever, and particularly when you can't go out anywhere if you're under lockdown, it's very, very difficult. And if you're in a small house, a small apartment, you've got children, you've got parents to look after, everybody living in that same, where do you go to work to have that private, quiet place to work? It's not easy. And the mental health and making sure people are fit to work, I think is a real difficulty. And that's a difficult skill for anybody to train. It's something which actually does require people. And one of the things, you know, we talked about before the call about soft skills. One of the important soft skills, I think, is that whole compassionate element about mental health.
Absolutely.
And you know, a lot of organizations won't have those professionals in to actually deal with that issue. And to just do that on an e-learning course is almost impossible. It requires sympathy and empathy. I don't know how do you guys handle that? Shailesh, do you have any problems with that? Or?
No, so we realized, you know, we had a group meeting in the morning, and you know, we have been discussing most of the technical issues around training. And one of the things that especially cropped up was, you know, how do we look at soft skills? You know, and one of the element is, you know, do we also look at courses, you know, which can, uh, as you mentioned, that the mental health of people. You know, do we have someone who can speak to them about it, you know, how to remain active, how to have a positive outlook? So, and it may not be meant only to, you know, the employees, it could be for the employee and his family as well, because these are the times which are testing for everyone. And we as organization would also like to contribute in a good way, engage with people, and give them enough confidence that, you know, we will come out of it. So it's not only a hardcore technical training that is important, but it is also the softer part of training. And coming to this training again, you know, how do you make it very effective is a question on everyone's mind, you know, because it could be a one-way communication. But one of the things that we have started is, you know, having quizzes after the training, and also some technical evaluation of have people really attended it in a good way, or, you know, they've just sat looking at a screen. And so how do you evaluate it? How do you make it more interactive? Are the challenges for the future, because we want engaged audience. We can't have, you know, if you're sitting in a conference room, you can fairly make out who's engaged and who's not, and then, you know, give a feedback immediately. But otherwise on an online, it is almost impossible to do that. So that makes it, you know, and these are the things which are emerging as strong elements, you know, when it comes to online training, that we must look at, have we been effective in delivering this kind of a thing?
It's interesting that you bring that up, Shailesh.
We've been discussing about this part.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I think it's, and I think we had a couple of points around it. So do you want to ask Shailesh and James as to, what we were discussing? It's a really interesting conversation
Yeah,
we
yeah,
had.
this could get really interesting. So, it's interesting that James is here because one of the concerns we were having around that was data privacy. So, Shailesh, we have been experimenting with within our product to kind of use AI and ML to do attentiveness detection while people take online courses, whether it is for live or it is for watching videos or courses. And we have been doing these hackathons where we have tried some things to try and gauge the mood of a person that is watching the training and trying to gauge how attentive he is. So what you can do basically is that basis my gaze. So I'm looking at the camera right now.
Right.
What the screen size is and things like that. You can try to get a decent idea of whether I'm looking somewhere else or am I actually staring at the screen. Of course, I could be daydreaming while staring, but
Yeah.
try to get an idea, right? So
Sure.
the question to you, James, would be: is something like this? I mean, from a data protection perspective, and because you come from that background, where if I was a learner and if the platform had to, use my live camera feed to do things like this, what are the data protection implications?
So you'd probably be looking at, you've got to look at what sort of data you're capturing and then what's your lawful basis, right? Without getting this into a big old GDPR thing, but thanks for putting me on the spot anyway. That's it's, we're looking at that really where we're looking at, presumably if your AI is looking at, it's effectively a facial recognition element because you're actually presumably looking at very different facial elements about how people are responding as opposed to, you may well be looking at what interactions are going on the computer. So there's a couple of things. So if you're allowing that computer program, first of all, on a technical side of things, to monitor when that window is closed and potentially are they opening up something else, another browser window, another application, how much information about that application and what's actually happening is actually being recorded and transferred to you. So there are technical elements about what that user is doing. And you've got to look at, am I only making sure I capture the information which is absolutely necessary to the particular process? The other side of it is if we're doing biometric things, so actually sort of monitoring eye movements with on facial expression, all this kind of thing, then again, it's sort of more biometric data, which is Article 9 special category data under GDPR, and potentially you're building up a information on that. So you need a reason for doing it. Now, the obvious way of doing it would be that before starting that program, then people would consent to that processing.
Yeah.
The issue with consent is that actually that's fine if people are volunteering that, but if as an employer, you say, we want everybody to do this and we are going to monitor you from home and make it a contractual obligation that you do this e-learning and we can monitor you at home, that's a whole different kettle of fish about whether that's actually an equitable thing, where there's going to be unions that get involved. It's a longer debate. I think it's probably worthy of a separate webinar, in all honesty.
Right.
But you could equate it as well to how about the high-end motor vehicles that some people buy, which will monitor to see if you're going to fall asleep.
Yeah.
And there's cars that do that. And, is anybody signing a waiver or having a contract when they buy the car, or are they just switching that feature on? So, and where's that data going? Often that data in motor vehicles will actually be going back to the manufacturer. And has anybody got a clue what they're doing with it? So there's elements of what are we collecting? Is it necessary? Are we being transparent with people what we're doing with that data? Do you actually use it for any other statistical purposes? And if you equate this a little bit to some of the information that comes out around, let's just relate this back to COVID-19 for a second, about some of the things which have come out from the European Data Protection Board that sort of controls data protection issues around Europe. And their guidance is very much about things like, if we take an example of other special category data that's happening in the UK right now, the supermarkets over here, which will offer a delivery service, have been completely overwhelmed. So what they've been given is they've been given information relating to vulnerable people in society. So people that can't get to a shop. They may be old, they may have illness, they may be disabled, they may have some other impairments or other reasons why they can't get out there. So the government has shared with them their medical data and say, this, or not necessarily medical data, but these people are vulnerable. They're in a vulnerable group. So it won't say that this person has this particular disease, but it'll say this person's vulnerable. Can you get in touch with them and arrange that you can offer delivery services to them so they don't have to go to a shop? Fantastic. What about GDPR in this instance? Well, actually, you are allowed under public health. Actually, GDPR was fairly prescient about pandemics because it actually mentions pandemics and the transfer of data and the sharing of public health data in relation to epidemics. And it's something where this is really interesting. But the advice, of course, is that once the supermarkets have got that information, do we want them to keep it? So no, they can only use it for this purpose around this sort of public health emergency, and it has to be destroyed afterwards. So if we're going to use sort of other sensitive data when we're actually recording people on video, we're going to make sure we're only using it for that purpose. We tell people about that purpose, and that actually, you know, we destroy that information when it's no longer necessary. So is that immediately after that session ends, or is there something that goes back to the employer to say, you know what, Parth really wasn't paying attention when James was rabbiting on about GDPR? You know, so it's which is a very common thing I find. It's
common by
considerations. So that's why we have in data protection law, and as it's coming in within India as well, a similar thing exists about doing what they call data protection impact assessments. So let's look at what rights of data subjects may be impacted, and then what are we going to do to mitigate those impacts? And that's why we do those data protection impact assessments beforehand, not after we start doing something.
You mentioned about public health, and there's a question coming in from the panel from Santosh. So what about mental health? So during all this, a lot of things are being affected, and one of the most important aspects is the mental health of people, of employees and people at large. So what kind of training or courses or anything else, any material that you would suggest for people to go through or people to take as courses?
So there is a Save a Life Foundation in Mumbai. Mm-hmm. They have a Facebook page as well. So they do some programs on managing, psychological well-being during isolation. So you could reach out to them to see if they could do a program. They're doing it for some corporates as well. So right. We are planning to reach out to them and see, if something, what's the course structure and how do they deliver it and things like that. So it's on Facebook, Save a Life, SAL Foundation.
Make a note of that. And then, so is there something similar that exists in UK, James? Are there some courses, or is there material or a website that can help people?
I don't know specific courses. I was just having a quick look actually here was whether there's a mental health charity called Mind, which is mind.org.uk, where people are having problems, you can get in touch directly with that charity. I don't know for sure what they do about supporting, if we think about in training, the train the trainer model, if you will. But I imagine that, if reaching out to somebody like Mind, they'd at least be able, it's not my area, unfortunately. I imagine that they'd at least be able to signpost people into organizations that might be able to help that organizational delivery of such a material. Whether they do specific courses or not, I don't know off the top of my head. I was just having a quick look, but maybe that's something that we can share on the chat after the call, and I'll have a look into it.
And there's one more interesting question coming from Nidhi, I believe. So she's asking if there are any suggestions that, Shailesh and James, you would like to make around habits. So when we come back to the world where we will hopefully be working together the way we were working, are there any habits that we must inculcate right now that'll come in handy when the world is sort of happy again?
So I'll tell you a story about my dad for a second. So my father, he was a managing director of a civil engineering company for about 30 years. And then towards the end of it, he got fed up a little bit of the pressure of trying to make sure that in that industry, the peaks and troughs of getting business in and trying to sustain a workforce of 600, 800 people. And he decided that he was just going to work for himself. He had the opportunity to just do some contracting and freelance work. So he set himself an office up at the house. And I remember that every day that my dad, coming from a very traditional work environment, he, the days he was working, he'd come down, he'd have his breakfast, he'd go upstairs, and then he would he'd put his collar and tie on and a jacket, and he would go and start work at 9 o'clock. And then he'd have his lunch for half an hour. He'd finish at 5:30. And he used to do his work day, and he'd always put his shirt and tie on. Now, I must say, I'm a little bit, coming from an e-learning background and new media, we tend to be a little less formal. But, my dad, even when he was working at home, nobody else in the house, he would put his shirt and tie on. And I think it's that question about routine, giving yourself a schedule. And you can also look at sort of like typical things around productivity when you're working at home. It's like give yourself a target. You may have a to-do list that's 500 things long, but instead of sort of getting overwhelmed by that to-do list, it's like, okay, this is my priority for today. This one's going to be done by 10 o'clock. This one I'm going to do by 11 o'clock. And we all know that work tends to expand to fill the time available. So in that case, give yourself a task and give you a deadline to finish it. Give yourself a schedule, be prepared for work, find a place to work where you can be private. You're not going to get interrupted with the cat jumping on your keyboard. I know you may have kids at home that aren't in school at the moment. And it's about give them things to do for an hour and then make sure that you can get 45 minutes solid in the work. And then, it's about setting out a schedule and sticking to your schedule, I think is really, really important, because otherwise we tend to start work later when we're working at home. Even though we think we haven't got a commute, we can start earlier, but it never works like that. And I say, if you've got kids which are not going to school, you'll find that your daily routine has just gone completely out the window.
Right.
I think few days back, I had a discussion with Ajay, and we actually discussed this, how to have self-discipline and how do you schedule meetings in the office time. It starts at 9 and probably ends at 5:36. So that's extremely important to develop this habit.
Right. And so there's one more question, interesting question from nonprofit space, that while skilling and reskilling, upskilling, all is important and needed, but when you don't have budgets and everything is cut, you don't know what's going to happen next, and you are in the nonprofit space, what are the ways for people to learn during this time and even later? So my answer to Disha is that there are ways in which you can do that by leveraging a lot of good material on YouTube, Vimeo, etc. Some links on excellent sites like TED, Harvard Business Review, etc. And there are systems, there are platforms in place who could actually leverage all the open source material for you, and you could have a structure around those courses, and you can make that happen for your people, for your employees, or even for your donors or sponsors. And if you want to promote any programs like that, it's absolutely possible. So Shailesh and James, what are your views on what could be done in the nonprofit space?
Even if we are not a non-profit organization, there are already few trainers who have approached us saying that they could do this kind of training free of cost. I think they are also looking at, not a short-term view, hopefully expecting that we will engage them once things are also rolled back, if we find it effective. So some of the people are also taking this opportunity to market themselves, to see, how they are perceived, develop their course content, and word of mouth helps in these kind of programs as well. So there could be possibilities to reach out to people who could actually do it free of cost, looking at the present situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's various different things which people have offered for free because of COVID-19. So, for instance, we've offered some free our training resources for free. I think there's lots of other organizations doing something similar that have made things freely available. There's a lot of good free stuff out there. Of course, that's in the digital kind of things. The other thing is look for organizations which are more umbrella organizations, either in your sector as a not-for-profit, or indeed just umbrella organizations for helping with third sector management. they may be able to consolidate various different resources and actually get people to do things for free. I think most commercial companies and even individuals who offer things, if you tell them that you're not for profit, will be able to offer you some kind of support. Everybody, wants to help not-for-profits. It's good for their PR. If you look at it from a purely material point of view, there's generally things available to help. The other side of it as well is that we are looking at specific things around working from home. A course which is very, very good, which was put together by the UK National Cyber Security Centre, is tips for staff working from home, stay at home. It's about sort of malware, understand phishing, just give some general top tips. It's about half an hour piece of e-learning. So if you wanted a piece of e-learning which was generally how do I work from home on the technical side and managing my own personal computer, then that's a freely available course which you don't have to have a learning management system for. You can just go on there and run through the e-learning. You don't get tracked and you don't get any assessment from it, but it's a good little course. It's nicely done. We've taken that. They allow anybody to take it and use it. So we've taken that and used it with our customers as well. It's been very good.
Right. And so we were also talking about, me and Parth both, that a lot of things are going to change. And when they change, businesses will be affected. There may be downsizing, there may be impacts on all the skill development programs. And when there is a huge effect on what's going on in the organization, what sort of roles will need upskilling and or maybe even reskilling? So one from the India standpoint or the manufacturing industry standpoint, if the worst is yet to come, and if it does come, where do you think, Shailesh, people will need to reskill and upskill themselves? What competencies or what skill sets?
Yes,
what jobs will change to something else?
Having worked in the manufacturing sector for a fair bit of time, I think since we have a lot of people already, there are also habits which have developed saying that there is always someone who will support you on something, right? So whether it's your supplier or, someone else, so you don't really get into all the details. But with this change happening, you might be forced to get into a lot of details which you were not used to. So you would actually seek as a person more information on the product, on its application, on what is required. So you might yourself, as a user of the product, seek more information. So, suppliers or companies who are supplying those products will be obliged to provide this information in a very, very user-friendly way. Otherwise, their sales could get impacted. So that's something which will come very strong, and they would like to also have ease of ordering, for example, moving forward. So
my question was more from a standpoint that, for example, in some cases, restaurators are forced to change their business to a delivery kitchen, which can fall under essential services, and the business can still continue. So the waiters can actually, stewards can actually become delivery boys. Likewise, in the manufacturing setup, is there a way for people to sort of still keep their job and change some roles? So some roles might become automated, some jobs might get cut. Is there still a way and for people to keep jobs, and what sort of roles or jobs may get a little difficult to keep?
Yeah, so automation has always been some kind of a threat to the jobs, and that will continue. Maybe these kind of things will move even faster. Supply chains would probably get consolidated within the countries rather than crossing borders. So those are some of the challenges. So there could be, some more investments in one segment and some less investment in other segment. But I think supply chain management would be very, very crucial. Also, how is your risk spread across different suppliers? I think that is something which was on the agenda of many companies, but no one really probably looked at it so seriously until their production actually suffered because of various reasons. because of the ongoing pandemic, or based on where you are located in the world. So these are the things which people will look into more detail. So some of the jobs will require increase in skills, like how do you manage supply chain, how do you assess risk, how do you manage risk, things like that. That will gain more importance, in terms of being independent more, independent of suppliers. You can choose a supplier without he actually having to physically visit you. Those are the things which will go very fast. But manufacturing per se will require people on the shop floor as well. So you can't discount that part of it.
Right. James, your view.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how, I think a lot of this is still panning out, and we need to see, how Darwinism really applies, about how companies adapt. And is the answer to a lot of companies that we're going to actually start using more automation than people? Allows you to ramp up and down, and switch a machine off is a lot easier than switching people off. But that's not necessarily the nice answer that we're looking for. I think the big skill, which I think, and thing that we'll see changes in an industry which emerges from this, is actually, a lot more risk management professionals and disaster planning. And I think that supply chain thing is very, very true, particularly in manufacturing. I mean, over here, what we're seeing is, the UK is, its dependence on overseas for food, for example. So we had a lot of panic buying in the supermarkets.
Mm.
And then it sort of eased off. Now everybody's filled the cupboards. But, with getting on, not want to have a Brexit discussion, but, a lot of the people who would be picking our fruit and vegetables that we actually grow ourselves would be European. So actually, there's now a lot of people have been applying for jobs because the farmers have been saying, well, we need people to be able to come and pick the fruit and vegetables. So it's actually people, you look at the jobs which are emerging because of COVID-19, there seem to be in distribution. So Amazon is hiring, Tesco's and the supermarkets are hiring because they need more people, and because partly some are getting sick, they need people to replace, but they're just so busy with the different services they offer. You look at agriculture and farming. They're not necessarily the most high-skilled jobs, because I think a lot of the danger is that some businesses which are actually the more high-skilled are actually going to look at ways of doing more on automation, doing more online, which actually just means people get made redundant either way. It's some businesses, as we've discussed, potentially are just going to close down because they don't necessarily want to take on the risk of getting government-backed loans, losing money just to survive. It's easy for them to shut down and open up again at a later point in time. I mean, you said the restaurant industry is just, if anybody, when we start being able to go out again, I'm not sure how many restaurants there'll still be for us to go to.
Mm.
Right.
Is the honest to goodness truth. So it's interesting. I think it's still emerging about how this is going to pan out, about what skills people want. I think a lot of people in status quo are just going to be really concerned just about trying to get some semblance of the business back to as it was before. I think one skill, which again we talked about just before the call, is around sales and marketing. I think travel is going to be so impacted, particularly if you do international or where sales require a lot of regional travel. I think the ability to be able to have good people who can network, generate leads, not in that traditional manner, but actually doing more of it online, which is traditionally, we look at traditional businesses, it's often still been the conference, it's been the networking events. It has been that let's get to meet people, these things, which actually generates a lot of business. The digital world has been very good at adapting to online marketing, online sales, if you've got an online product. But I think moving towards more of, virtual conferences, that kind of networking, and actually people who can really give very good presentations, as Shailesh mentioned, I think it's going to be really key to business survival. And I think people are going to be looking at ways of actually making sure they can bring revenue back in, because I think the fluidity of finance is just going to be a very difficult thing in a few months' time for a lot of businesses.
So one question is, so conferences are affected, education is going online. We've got a lot of inquiries from schools and colleges around taking their entire education system online. How does it affect jobs and skills in the education sector?
So interesting in the UK, around, we were probably getting to about 18, 20 years ago, we had a thing in the UK, which was the rollout of broadband to schools and the development of high-end interactive e-learning content that schools could buy and colleges. And with that, you know, interactive whiteboards, and every school was mandated to have a virtual learning environment. That went the way of a dodo about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where schools no longer had to have virtual learning environments, partly because actually teachers weren't really trained to actually change their way of teaching to use the virtual learning environments very well. Interactive whiteboards tend to be used as a display medium. So the virtual learning environments were used very much for storage of content. Not many were building their full curriculums on there, using them for assessment. It was a way of submitting an assignment, but a lot of the teaching and learning still went on in the classroom. I think a lot of them would really wish they'd kept them and were using them a lot better over the last month. So we've seen people move to Google Classroom. The virtual learning environments that still exist in the UK are still being used. We're seeing people use Microsoft Teams. A lot of schools in the UK, this is very much a UK perspective, but I think it's similar around various different places in the world. You know, a lot of schools will be buying into either Microsoft or the Google's education stack. And so, yeah, we've seen a lot of people using that. We've seen a lot move on to Zoom, trying to deliver lessons using Zoom. From a data protection point of view, you know, Zoom has just suddenly come from a webinar tool to people using it for private meetings, and the security issues around Zoom have been well known for a long time. And at least they're finally doing something about it now they've been called out on it. I was a bit surprised to see the UK Cabinet actually use Zoom for a cabinet meeting a couple of weeks ago. It would be interesting if that one had been bombed by somebody just guessing the ID code of the meeting. But at least they've improved things a little bit now. So it's education. I think we'll see people actually starting to adapt back to using virtual learning environments a lot more and learning management systems. It's interesting that Vowel has seen an uptake there. I haven't looked to see what things like, whether people have been trying to download more copies of Moodle and things like that. But I say we've certainly seen, because we did a survey of all of our schools for a very preliminary data protection impact assessment of what changes in ways of working are they proposing to do when all the staff are going to be working at home. So we saw some of them using, you know, really just moving towards what they've got in place around the Google or Microsoft stack. Others want to use Zoom. Others are buying into other virtual learning environments. Others are just putting resources on their websites and directing parents to download them and take, you know, it varies so widely. But I mean, I think this is an opportunity for learning management systems to become far more mainstream as a tool. And what it is, it's really adapting leadership and getting buy-in from leadership and the people using them, that actually there is another way of teaching and learning available, not just standing in front of a whiteboard.
No, and the virtual education system will of course improve the effectiveness as well. I mean, if you take people delivering lectures, you know, for new recruits, for example, you know, you will engage so many people to do basically the same thing. So might as well have a recorded training material. So all the new recruits can just sit in front and, you know, listen to that and maybe apply for a test or something. Or if you could track, as you said, you know, how keen they are involved in these kind of virtual training classrooms is something we could look at. But from a effectiveness point of view, and getting the training from an expert would make all the difference for upskilling as well.
Just before I know, Paul, if you want to jump in, I was going to want to say one thing about the whole tracking of people as well. So this is my story from Sweden. So the Swedish equivalent, or the regulatory authority in Sweden for data protection, issued a fine of 20,000, was it krona or euro? I can't remember, to a school in Sweden that was using facial recognition technology in the classroom for monitoring attendance. So
It's very
But
Swedish.
what the problem was that, I mean, I thought, it was very Swedish, but it'd be nice to have a budget in a school where you could afford to put facial recognition technology in rather than buy books, So it was a very Swedish solution, but also it was a very Swedish sort of fine as well, because it was their first fine under GDPR at all.
Okay.
And the reason we got fined really was not for using the biometrics of the facial recognition. It was actually the fact that consent, they asked for consent, and consent wasn't freely given. And it wasn't a consent issue because they were using it as a different lawful basis. So they made a bit of a mess of it. But I did think actually it was interesting that, facial recognition was, the book seemed to work in my day of just sort of like ticking a box whoever I was there, but it's an interesting approach.
Yeah, it's pretty much a cultural issue as well. In some countries you might feel that, if I'm providing, I have the right to know what is being doing.
Just to add some context to that, since the question came from education domain, and I have a little perspective to add. So we have one of our clients in the US who is teaching, higher education students. And this is a professor who teaches 100% online. And in the last 3 weeks, the state of Minnesota has put together, I think, a panel of some 12 to 15 teachers who are experts at teaching online to help take something like 100 plus courses online. And these guys have been working, almost round the clock to make this happen in very short time. It's interesting how people are trying to adapt. Same thing in India. The MHRD is pushing Diksha, which is a government-driven e-learning platform for school kids, and the push is massive. They have seen huge numbers increasing because even the government schools and the private schools that are funded by government are shut, and there has been a huge uptick. And I think it's interesting that there was some readiness about this, but I don't think the scale was really, nobody was ready for the scale. And I think like James said, Shailesh said, a lot of things will be about adapting and learning to teach online. For example, there is a lot of value and feedback in teaching offline, especially for teachers. And probably they will need to learn to adapt to these online tools and the kind of feedback they can offer, and kind of take it from there. There will be a lot of adaptation to do, but I think the tools are there. It's about creating a streamlined approach to solve the problem.
Yeah, just to echo, I mean, again, apologies if it's a little bit UK centric, but over here, the Department for Education has published a list of resources which are they're not mandatory, but they are suggestions about things which can be used for learning at home. We're very fortunate in the UK. There's a lot of great digital resources. The BBC as well is starting from the 20th of April, is actually doing I think we're going to be doing like little TV shows in the morning and actually delivering a curriculum, but so you could see your kids in front of a TV, and at least they're going to actually go through the curriculum. Where it's all online, I don't know. I'll have to check on that. But it's they're going to be doing these daily lessons effectively, so that actually people who are teaching at home can do it. And I say there's a lot of resources available recommended by DFE that parents can go on there. And the Industry Association, BISA, the British Educational Suppliers Association, also has a website where there's lots of resources. So, and to get on that resource site for BISA, you have to have something freely available, some free trial or some free consultants that you can offer people at this moment in time. And they've really done a big push on that through because of this schools working from home.
So going back to, rather relating your Sweden story back to Shailesh, as Shailesh has held a president's role in a very large Swedish manufacturing firm before. So Shailesh, imagine, and I think we have somebody in the audience as well, Shirish, who's had a Swedish background. So imagine we cannot meet people. Europe is very strict about data and privacy. There's no way we are traveling, and I still want to sell to Sweden. What skills am I going to build, and how am I going to build those? So from service standpoint, from sourcing standpoint, from selling standpoint, how do I sell to Europe? Or should I ever?
As the Swedes would say, interesting question. Yeah, I mean, you need to build relationships for sure there. So it's nothing will
How?
happen,
During
you
and
know.
post-COVID, how? Is it only online? Uh,
You
what
would,
strategies do I develop? I need to find, I want them to find me. So I
or
just,
ref, or would references might help.
right.
Yeah, that
So,
would definitely
so from,
help.
so from skill sets point standpoint, I mean, like probably James said, you need to present well. You need to reach out to people in the right manner, probably go through references, or maybe be found, then finding other people, and then again be a good salesperson. But like we were discussing, you can't really meet people. There are no handshakes, and you still want to win the deals. You had a background across multiple continents, and you've been leading organizations there, building businesses, managing P&L. Uh, Now, what would you do if you had similar roles again to play, to sell to the rest of the world and also to provide services and goods to the rest of the world? What skills do you need now? You need to build.
Yeah, I mean, if you look 4 years back, the digital platforms of communication were also not very well evolved. I mean, you had these online platforms which have evolved over the last maybe 4 years, 5 years, where you can actually sit face to face and have a chat like this. So I would definitely use this, and I think that's a fairly well accepted situation in Europe. You could easily connect and ask someone for joining a meeting or something. That's perfectly acceptable. So these online platforms have really evolved, and people have started to work on these platforms, and this has become the new norm because people understand that if you travel to Sweden back and forth, you will, and if you get the contract, you will charge that fees to them as well. So so so
So,
in that context, I think this is perfectly an acceptable way of reaching out.
so, so we've got about 8 minutes left now, and we have one question that's also in your Q&A session. That's post-COVID. Are we seeing competency remodeling? Are companies actually ready to rewrite the old models of competency? Will the standard playbooks change? Is it really happening at that level?
I think there's a couple of things there. So one, I think just talking about competency assessments for a second. So I think that you know we're seeing a massive amount of people be made unemployed right now. I mean, you only have to look at the figures in America are absolutely staggering. The number of people who are claiming went unemployed last week. In the UK, we've added, I think, about 1 million. I mean, it's only a month ago that our new chancellor stood up and said that things were looking so bright and wonderful. And then, a couple of weeks later is saying here's 350 billion for you. And now we've had since, the middle of March, I think it's 950,000, nearly 1 million people are effectively out of work. A lot of those in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
I say the supply chain industries and food supply chain, I think, and things are doing well, but not everybody wants jobs in those. So I think it's one of those where assessing people's competencies are going to be really key. And what skills can you adapt and what training can you do? And one of the interesting things at the moment, a lot of people on this call, myself included, and everyone, all the participants, will at some time might have sat down in front of a computer in a proctored examination center to do some kind of online certification. Well, they're all shut. So how is everybody getting any of these certifications? Because you can't just take them on your own computer because there's no proctoring going on. So it's that whole certification model around is going to be interesting about competence as well. Because how do you actually demonstrate your competence if you haven't got the years of experience doing something, and we've got to retrain and train up and do different things for all the people who are now unemployed? You often do it by making sure you've got a certification. And at the moment, it's going to be interesting to see the capacity of examination centres online if you actually want to get into somewhere where you've got to sit an online exam.
Interesting. Shailesh?
Yeah, from within the manufacturing, I think the behavioral changes that this has, the COVID event has happened will be far more significant than, of course, the skilling part as well. Because earlier, people used to encourage you to visit and, engage in conversations, but that might change. which would definitely mean that you need to reach out even in more digital way, as much information you could provide without physically being present. So that's something which will be needed more than just landing up in front of the customer. Because I understand that there are a lot of manufacturing industries who have already started to prepare that, if you want to enter their facility, you will be given a disinfectant bath or something like that through the
Right.
entrance. So it becomes challenging, to get easy entry into some of these factories, which you would normally do. So those behavioral changes will make us adapt, to newer ways of selling, whether it is providing information, engaging with customers, closing the deal,
Right.
and things like that. So it might get a little bit more distant than sitting across the table. That will definitely happen. We are seeing it happening already. So before 2-3 weeks before COVID. So
Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
So to add to that, I think the question was, are the competency models going to change? So, and are the companies are ready? So one thing I can see for sure is talking to all the kind of different kind of people we are talking to, especially being in the space we are. We have seen how much the outlook has changed towards e-learning, which used to be a good to have probably, to it being a need to have, which is already changed. And I'm sure because of the constraints COVID brings on various job functions, I don't think there'll be any choice but to change. It's about how I think how proactive companies are in doing this and actually get to doing it faster. I think they will adapt better to this situation. Uh, because there'll be so many. I mean, Ajay, you talked about the sales function. You talked about a couple of other functions where a face-to-face and a handshake was a given, and now that it's not there, and it's not going to be there for a long time, right? Like James said, I don't see myself catching a flight at least 6 months from now. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's going to be 8 months or a year. So a lot of those things are just going to change. So the situation is going to change, has changed. And I definitely say that, I mean, if they aren't ready, that better get ready. Because these things are changing and have changed, and it'll just be about when they change rather than if, because only those who change will probably be able to kind of survive this kind of
Right.
situation that we have right
Right. Absolutely. So we are nearing the 4 o'clock timing. I must thank all of you for joining in. I'm thanking profusely to James and Shailesh for joining in. Shailesh, I think we just lost your video. I'm sure you're there listening. So it was a uh, great, insightful session, I must say. I hope a lot of us have got our answers. Some could ask, some could, and we could answer some. Some may still remain, but I think we are there. We'll be sending you the recording of the webinar as well. And while that happens, Parth, maybe you would want to talk about the next one. So the next webinar is going to be on 24th April. This will be focused on the small and medium enterprises, because we all know that the buck actually stops way down and the buck is already being passed on. So when the large companies slow down, the smaller ones slow down and the smallest ones get killed much faster. So, but if we have to actually emerge winners, and as small and medium enterprises, we must do something, and we must have certain skill sets, and what those could be is what is going to be spoken about by our expert coach Manish Gupta, and please join us on 24th of April. Parth, do you have a parting note? We could conclude with 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to quickly thank James and Shailesh for being here and sharing their insights. I think this was a very interesting discussion, very different standpoints, very different perspectives coming from, very different backgrounds, and both geographically and
It's
from an
4
industry
o'clock.
perspective. So I think my Mac wants me to stop. It's saying it's 4 o'clock, but yeah, so I think it was a fantastic session. Thank you so much, James. Thank you, Shailesh, and thank you everyone for being here. We have had a couple of
Yeah, thank you.
fantastic sessions. We hope to keep doing this We are taking a short break. We won't be doing anything next week. We'll be back the week after with the session on SMEs, like we said. If you have any topics that you would like us to take up or any specific speakers you would like to invite, do put that in the chat or just come back to us on email, and we will get back to you on that. So thank you once again, James. Thank you, Shailesh. It was a real pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you, and yeah, thanks everyone for sticking and listening to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So if we have any open questions, we will get back to you on email on those. I think we are out of time. So that's it for this time. See you around on the 24th. Thank you. I'm signing off. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.